What's up, Steeler fans? And I had said that the Monday morning conversation was kind of going away during the season. Well, there's a little bit of a lull here. And as we always do, and we have all off season, it's time to do our final 53-man roster predictions here. And joining me as always to do that is Dave Schofield. Dave, what's up? How's it going?
Hey, it's going. I'm not a Monday morning conversation. I'm a regular. This is just
right.
doing what we do. You don't have to make it sound all special just for me.
Well, how confident were you with these predictions? Because I actually, after the watching, obviously we talked about the third preseason game, the loss to the Lions on Saturday, and I was like, you know what? Like, I actually feel pretty confident in my prediction. Not that I'm going to be right, because there's a lot of stuff that can change. Players can be moved to the reserve injured list. They can acquire players. A lot of that stuff can happen. But in terms of the players that are on the 90-man roster now, I actually was able to go through this rather quickly and say, like, I have a good feel for things. You agree?
Mostly, I think. I mean, I was going to say this when we got to the defense. We'll go ahead and say it now. I feel right now that I have 8 players for 6 spots.
Yeah,
is what I have going on. I don't see anybody else as a possibility beyond those. So
right.
there's just a couple interesting things to say. Is it going to be this person or is it going to be this person? And I wouldn't be shocked if any of those are shuffled around. And this is also going on that the Steelers haven't added anybody else into the mix, because I don't believe that their final 53-man roster for week 1
Right.
is going to consist only of players that we have to choose from right now. I think
Agree.
there's going to be additions and possibly subtractions, but more likely additions.
Agree 100%. And so just so everyone knows, you know, like, we're recording this on Sunday, obviously. And so at the time of this, we're being recorded. You know, let's say something happens and a player gets moved to IR and they make that announcement Sunday afternoon, evening. Okay, that's why that might be the way it is. So we'll go through it. We'll walk you through it. Let's start on offense, as we always do, and the quarterback position. And we kept the same 3: Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kyle Allen. We both said in our descriptions that Plumlee was a good story. I think he could have a spot on the practice squad, but I could also see why he might say thanks, but no thanks, because he was drafted in the UFL. And so he could actually go and play in the spring if he doesn't think he's actually going to get called up. I don't know how that's going to work out for him, but Dave, anything you want to add to the quarterback discussion?
Well, honestly, if he's on the practice squad, I think he could collect that money all year and then just not sign a futures contract in January and then go play in the UFL.
That's true.
So I think that could still be an option. And I've said it in the past that a lot of times people talk about as 4th quarterback with the Steelers. Oh, practice squad. No, they just don't. But Plumlee's not just a quarterback, and that's why I think he is someone who could be on the practice squad because of everything else he showed them when it came to special teams, even filling in at wide receiver, things of that nature.
Yeah, so if he makes the practice squad, it's not going to be as QB4 necessarily. It's going to be as punt returner, kick returner, special teams guy more than it is that. So, okay.
Or as they say in Pittsburgh, utility.
Yes, there you go. All right, let's go to running back. You and I both had Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, Cordell Patterson. I thought that Cordell Patterson's performance against Detroit just kind of solidified his roster spot. Yeah. I was one of the people that kind of wondered, okay, like, if this guy's not returning kicks, which I think he will return kicks in the season, by the way.
Yes.
But if he's not going to return kicks, what are we doing? And I also don't see a 4th running back making this roster. So there's a lot of people that, like, whether it's P. Ryan or a bunch of other guys, Ward was another one, maybe practice squad guys. I just don't see them being viable options on special teams enough to keep 4. Dave, you have the same 3. What was your thinking there?
Same deal. I think you could keep a couple running backs on the practice squad, which would be completely normal, because then that way you have them to bring up in case of injury. Is it going to, I mean, could P. Ryan be snagged by another team who needs one for their 53? Sure, he could be. But then you still have other options of players that you could do with that as well. I also include the fullback in that position because we're about ready to go to it. With Jack Coletto, I would love to just have a spot for him on this roster. I just don't think there's enough space. But I could even see that being someone on the practice squad and being, hey, this is a game we really would like to use a fullback for this specific game plan. We can elevate him this week.
Right, and so that's a good segue into the fullback position. You had Coletto on your 53 man up until I think the last one
The
we did.
last one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't. I know this fan base. Gosh, do they love natural fullbacks? I don't know if it's Dan Kreider or what it was back in the early 2000s, but boy, do they love themselves some natural fullback. I just don't see it really in the modern in modern games as that type of player. You do have the Kyle Juszczyks, but he's so much more than just a fullback. And so
Yeah.
I have none. You have none. You did mention about Coletto maybe being a practice squad candidate, but I just don't see anyone as a fullback like that making the squad. Obviously, you're going to have a Connor Hayward as a slash fullback there. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I pretty much said my piece because I kind of grouped that in with the running
Yeah.
backs. That I just think they could have as many running backs slash fullbacks on the practice squad as they do on the 53.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the next position we differ in terms of number, in terms of
Mhm.
quantity. You have 5 receivers making it. You had Des Fitzpatrick in, Scotty Miller out. I had Des Fitzpatrick in, but Scotty Miller staying. Now, let me justify my line of thinking first. I think that between Calvin Austin III, Scotty Miller, and Des Fitzpatrick, they all three provide special teams value and depth. I also think you're going to see a revolving door on the inactive list between these
Oh yeah,
three guys. And I think too, if they were to add a receiver, I would probably say Scotty Miller is the first to go. But I could see that's a toss up. It's a coin toss between Scotty Miller and Des Fitzpatrick if they're adding it. But in terms of who they have on their roster right now, and I do think they're going to acquire a wide receiver. Doesn't necessarily mean it's Brandon Ayuk, but I could see them finding someone else out there. I still see them keeping 6. Dave, why did you have them keeping 5?
because I honestly, because I said earlier about keeping 6 of 8 defenders. If I do that, I can only keep 5 of 8. And
Yeah.
that's why, because honestly, when it comes to being a wide receiver, are you really excited about Scotty Miller or Des Fitzpatrick? Not
No, but
really.
they do bring special teams value.
They
They
do.
need special teamers.
And that's why I picked Fitzpatrick over Miller, because I thought that he could bring that even more on special teams. I could see it be both. And I actually threw this in the article. If you were to ask me for, hey, give me someone who could be a shocking cut come Tuesday, I'm not outside of the realm of Calvin Austin III being a definite on this team. I'd still think
true.
he's there,
Yeah.
but that's someone that I'm saying, how excited are we with him? Or were the Steelers going out of their way to not show much with him in the preseason? That also could have been true as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, when I was going through the list and I was looking at who we both had, I was like, Calvin Austin III, man, the guy just hasn't done much this preseason. So I see what you're saying. I agree 100%.
It could
So
go
then
either way
absolutely.
from that where he
So
is. Yep.
I kept one more receiver than Dave, and then I kept one less tight end than Dave. We're going to the tight ends.
Okay.
Dave kept 4, I kept 3. And I kept Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, and Connor Hayward. Michael Pruitt's a good story, and he had a nice catch from Justin Fields in the game on Saturday. Rodney Williams has been hampered with injury and hasn't done hardly anything. So I was like, okay, what value does Michael Pruitt bring? And I just couldn't think of anything. So I said, let's cut a tight end. Let's only roll with 3. That was my line of thinking. Dave, you kept Pruitt and you did not have Rodney Williams making your roster. What was your thinking there?
Well, when it comes to Hot Rod, well, first of all, he played in every preseason game. But did you even notice him? He has snaps logged in all 3 of them, but I never noticed him. And I think maybe that was intentional because he was a very good special teamer last year. Maybe by not having much seen in the preseason, he could land on the practice squad. That's where he started last year. I think he's a practice squad guy. The reason I'm sticking with 4 is 1, Connor Hayward is not your typical tight end. And the Steelers have run 3 tight end sets a fair amount here in the preseason. My goodness, the very first play on offense in their last preseason game was 3 tight ends. And
Yeah.
I don't really know that Connor Hayward brings as much as that, third tight end blocking wise as someone like Michael Pruitt would. So that's why I think of going with 4, because honestly, I see the Steelers using tight ends more than even wide receivers. I see more value of a 4th tight end than I do in a 6th wide receiver.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. It's going to be one of those positions that there could be some fluctuations there. But like you said, with defense, I wanted to keep an extra receiver. I had to create that space somewhere. So I ended up going with just 3 tight ends.
Which I could see as well.
Yeah, let's go to offensive line. We both had 9 players staying, with Nate Herbig, in my opinion, with Nate Herbig going on IR, this became easy.
Yeah.
It was just you saw a precipitous drop off on the offensive line on Saturday when the starting group left, and you had Devery Hamilton, who was the left tackle that got abused on more than one play. So I think I really like Dylan Cook as long as he's healthy enough to play. I think Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, Isaac Seumalo, James Daniels, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Spencer Anderson, Dylan Cook, and Dan Moore Jr. Those are your guys. You agree?
Yeah. The only thing that could change that is if they don't like what they have outside of Zach Frazier at center. If they feel, I think putting Ryan McCullum on the practice squad where he was last year, and if something happened where you needed him, you elevated him if he had to start. If you needed to just get through a game because someone was injured, you could call on right now, I don't even think Mason McCormick or a James Daniels or a Spencer Anderson just to get you through the rest of the game. And then if it's something else, you could use McCullum from the practice squad. They might think enough that they need to keep him on the 53, or they could go outside the organization for a backup center as well. I wouldn't be shocked, but I think right now this makes the most sense.
Yeah, and so we both finished it out with 9 offensive linemen, which adds to 24 total on offense. If you're smart, you're like, okay, what does this mean for defense? Well, let's get into defense. So the defensive line, Dave, you kept 7, I kept 6, sort of. I decided that when we were just going to do this, it's like, okay, it's the last one. Like, this is our last 53-man roster prediction before the roster cut down on Tuesday. So I'm going to try to be as specific as possible. So I have Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, Keanu Benton, Montravius Adams, Isaiah Loudermilk, and Dean Lowry making the team along the defensive line. And I have DeMarvin Leal out, but I wrote sort of next to it because I have him just moved in with the outside linebackers. But I had Logan Lee out last time, so he's not listed here. But I do want to say, I think he's a practice squad candidate. He hadn't played in the last game. We talked about that on the post-game show. It might have been a little gamesmanship on the Steelers' part to make him look injured, possibly. I don't know. But you have them keeping 7. And again, kind of that
we have all
caveat.
You have all 7 of what I have. It's just where you have it.
Yeah. And you agree with Lee as a practice squad guy?
Yeah, that's what I think. That could have just been a point. Now, maybe the Steelers aren't thinking that way, but I could see it. I think he's a guy they could get there. I don't know that anyone's going to run out of the way to because you have to put him on your 53. You have to put him on your 53 or convince him to sign with your practice squad instead of the Steelers. So to me, I think Lee's a guy that's there. He understands the depth of the room, but he also understands the age of the room and how with an injury, that means he could get moved up.
True.
So that's what I think there. And as for, I did an article at SteelCurrentNetwork.com last week about should the Steelers be keeping 7? Because 2020 and before, they only kept 6. Keeping 7, which a lot of people have kind of assumed that they were going to, has only been a recent thing. So to me, the last person in is Isaiah Loudermilk, although the Steelers seem to love him. He is the last guy when it comes to the depth chart, but I just don't see the Steelers being ready to move on from him. But if they did, that would not shock me at all.
Yeah. I mean, Loudermilk actually hasn't had a bad preseason, and Dean Lowry, to me, is the question mark of the group. He's the one that's been injured most of the preseason, and so it's like, well, what does he actually provide? He had a fumble recovery against Detroit, which, okay, that's fine. But
he started over Loudermilk in that last game.
That's true.
Loudermilk had started the first 2 games.
So. All right. So let's take a look at outside linebacker. Again, me just trying to be specific. Dave has 4, I have 5. We have the same player in the last 2 categories. We just switched them around. Dave did have a change of Jeremiah Moon out and Kyron Johnson in. I've had Kyron Johnson in the last 2, but I included DeMarvin Leal into this mix. So it's a total of 5. I do want to ask, Dave, what made you change from Jeremiah Moon to Kyron Johnson? Is it nothing more than health?
I didn't have room for both of them. They were both players that I have as part of those 8 on defense. That how many of these 8 are you going to keep? I had to cut one somewhere. And to me, saying that it was Johnson over Moon. Actually, I think last time I had 5. I didn't add Kyron Johnson. I had an extra one last time. So the last time I thought he was good enough, but I don't think they need to keep 5 if one of them's not DeMarvin Leal, who's also counting towards the defensive line.
Right.
They could even go as few as 3, not counting Leal, where you have 5 and you have Johnson, but you've got to have some special teams guys somewhere. To me, it's between Moon and Johnson, and I just went with Johnson because he played with the Steelers last year and just did special teams, and I think he would be their last option as an outside linebacker, but would be a key guy for special teams.
Yeah, I totally could see, if it weren't for special teams, DeMarvin Leal being the 4th outside linebacker, so to speak, and them just rolling with Watt, Highsmith, and Herbig primarily. But Leal brings
3-man
no
rotation.
special teams.
Just do it.
Exactly. So we agree there. In the last 2 categories, you saw us have the same players essentially. So let's move to inside linebacker. We both have 5. You added Tyler Matakevich, and so did I, but we both kept Mark Robinson. And a lot of fans might read this and say, well, why? And I think you cannot underscore how the Steelers special teams, especially their coverage units, were not great in the preseason. And so you need all hands on deck for special teams, especially with the changes that have been made. And so Mark Robinson, not the guy you want at inside linebacker, but he is a guy that you do probably want on special teams. And that same thing can be said about Tyler Matakevich. I like the Patrick Queen, Landon Roberts, Peyton Wilson trio at inside linebacker. And then you hope that Mark Robinson and Matakevich, maybe one of them's inactive on game day. I don't know. But I think we both see the value in both of these players. You agree or disagree?
Yeah, but I also wouldn't be shocked if either one of them was cut.
True.
So I couldn't really decide between the two. So for now, I have them both. I picked Matakevich and Robinson over Moon is what I ultimately went with for the decision. I don't think they can get by with 3 inside linebackers. So it's going to be one of the two. There's nobody else that's really into the mix here. Some people, was it Jacoby Windman that could play both positions, everything. He flashed to the first preseason game, but not so much since. So that's why I don't have him. I have him as a practice squad guy that could be someone who could be elevated, but I didn't really consider him at either position otherwise. But it could be. I went with both, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's one or the other. And even if it is both, then I think it's one or the other on game day.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. So inside linebacker seems to be set, and let's go to cornerback. We both have 6. This was a position that, similar to wide receiver. When I looked at the group, I'm like, I could see them having an outside name come in here and bump one of these guys off. And I'm almost expecting that. But we have Joey Porter Jr., Dante Jackson, Corey Trice. We both have Darius Rush, who didn't have a great preseason. Beanie Bishop, who was injured for a lot of the preseason and didn't play Saturday until the second half. And then Thomas Graham, the guy that has been filling in when Beanie Bishop has been out and hasn't done horrible. But so those are our 6 cornerbacks. Dave, what do you think about this room?
I'm confident on 2 of those. That's it. Porter and Jackson. And you might be saying, well, what about Trice? Loved Corey Trice. Then he ends up with a groin injury. Now, at the time of this recording, we do not have any update on the extent of that injury. Could it have just been, just a little tweak? He's going to be fine. We just aren't going to have him go back to the game. Or could it be, he's going to miss some time. We might even want to put him on IR, which they don't have to, keep him on the 53 for the 20 hours from Tuesday to Wednesday to do that like they used to. They could designate that there. If they think he's going to miss a couple weeks, they might just say, we're going to have him miss 4 and get better. We just don't know right now. So that's the only thing with him. Otherwise, he's good. But the last 3, I could see the Steelers, no joke, adding 2 or 3 more from outside the organization, and none of those 3 making it, if that's what they choose to do. Now, Beanie Bishop, if he doesn't make it, I think he's destined for the practice squad if he doesn't get grabbed up somewhere else. But Darius Rush, not a lot of confidence in him, but not any really better option than them. And the reason I went with 6, and you'll see why I went with that when it comes to safety, is because I don't know which one of those 3 they wouldn't keep right now in order to get the job done. And I could see any of those 3 actually being utilized on defense and not just special teams.
It's true. This room scares me probably more than the wide receiver room, if I'm being honest. But it's very similar. I feel like on the outside of the perimeter of both offense and defense, the Steelers are lacking severely. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And you said 2, maybe even 3 names coming from outside. Wouldn't be shocked at all. But let's finish it up with the safeties to round out the defense. You and I both have 4 in the same 4. Minka Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, DeMonte Casey, Miles Killebrew. I had Ryan Watts in that group with safeties. I moved him out. I wouldn't be shocked. It was a scary injury. Anytime you see a player that the way his head snapped back when he was making the tackle in Detroit on Saturday, it's a scary situation, especially Steeler fans that watched Ryan Shazier. He was moving and had movement in his extremities, but still, I wouldn't be shocked if Ryan Watts maybe gets moved to injured reserve and it ends his season, but he stays within the organization. I wouldn't be shocked at all. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully he's able to contribute and play, in which case they'll have a decision to make. I would see Ryan Watts potentially bumping one of those 6 cornerbacks off the list, maybe a Thomas Graham or a Beanie Bishop or a Darius Rush, because I don't think Darius Rush has had a great preseason. But so there's your 4. Dave, you confident in the safety group?
I mean, bottom line is I don't see anybody outside of those 4 other than Watts. Now, the tricky part is you've got Miles Killebrew, who really isn't someone that they use a lot on defense, but he's your all-pro special teamer. Maybe they use him more on defense now in a certain role. I see those top 3 safeties being on the field a lot, a whole lot. That as even if that could even be their nickel package if they needed to. That wouldn't even have to necessarily be dime. But the reason I went with those other 3 corners over Watts is I could see any one of them getting on the field on defense more than Watts. To me, Watts is about special teams and about depth. Now, if you get him to the practice squad, and I kind of hate to say it, the injury, the potential injury that they say is a stinger, the fact that he got up and walked off the field is huge. But that injury alone could keep him from being picked up off waivers. That could make him a practice squad guy, that if you get an injury to one of those other 3 safeties, he's your guy that then gets elevated. Because if they do have him as a 5th safety, I think he's a game day inactive as well. But once again, like I said, I couldn't pick which one of the corners it would be, because at first I thought, I'm going to put him in over Darius Rush. Well, then that leaves the Steelers with only 3 outside cornerbacks. You kind of want to have more than just, if you're going to have 5, you don't want to have 2 guys that are just your slot guys. Now, could it be Bishop or Graham? Not both. Absolutely. But I have no idea which one it would be right now. So to me, that's why I did what I did, because I just don't know.
Yeah. And honestly, like what the stinger, you brought up the injury. To me, since Trenton Thompson, I've always been like, well, it's not just a stinger. It can be way worse than that.
Yeah.
And when Trenton Thompson said how his neck injury, which was deemed a stinger last year at the end of the year, kept him from training all offseason, I was like, well, geez, like that might have been a stinger, but it was a hell of a lot more serious than we thought. So I got to keep that in the back of my head.
Because the other thing I keep in the back of my head was the first game I ever watched from my season ticket seats in 2015. It was the home opener against San Francisco, where Ryan Shazier was flying around the field, making all kinds of tackles, left that game at the end of the game with a stinger. I'm like, oh, it's good. It's just a stinger. He'll be back. Nope. He missed the next couple games.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. The level of those things could come into play. So that very well could keep Ryan. He's another guy, like I said, with Corey Trice. If you can have 2 guys designated for return that you don't have to go through that 20-hour period, the thing is, it does count as one of your 8 for the season. He could be that guy if they think that's what's going on. We could find out more about him in the coming hours.
For sure. So the specialists, nothing really to talk about there. We had the 3, the Cameron Johnson, Christian Coots, and Chris Boswell. I mean, I don't think there's anything to debate.
No, this is something that I noted in my why or analysis for these things, is if you were going to do anything with Matthew Wright, it would be, could you trade him?
Yes.
And now, could you trade him flat up for a pick or even a pick swap? I don't even know that you could do that, because teams know he's going to get released. They're going to keep Boswell. But if let's say you had a team that had an excess of wide receivers, but they were kicker needy, you could say, hey, we'll include this in the deal. Now, instead of having to give up, let's say, a 5th round pick for the wide receiver, now it's a 6th because we're throwing in the kicker along with it, and you don't have to worry about trying to claim him or other teams claiming him ahead of you. Something like that, but it would have to be a very specific situation. Other than that, I expect him to be released.
Didn't they do that last year? Didn't they keep 2 kickers last year? And we're like, this is it. There was the punter. It was the
punter because they were possibly going to trade him.
Yes, and we're like, all right, this is the plan. They're going to trade him. They kept 2 punters, and then they end up having to release him, and I think he got picked up by another team because teams are going to wait.
I'm pretty sure that the team that was looking to possibly trade for him was the Eagles, and guess who picked him up? It was the Eagles. So
they just waited him out. Yeah.
They just waited. They just waited the Steelers out and then just got him. So
yeah. All right. So we'll see what happens, Dave. Any final thoughts on your 53-man roster prediction as you look at it in its entirety?
Yeah, there's a few things that you're like, well, it could go this way, but they're at the bottom of the depth chart. The one that I think that creeps the most up the depth chart that you're not sure about is cornerback, especially with the questions that you have at slot. What are they going to do for that nickel cornerback? I think wide receivers could creeps a little bit more up the depth chart than other places. But really, it comes to the special teams, and a lot of that, you can see it on the field, but a lot of that does come behind closed doors and what they think more of players behind closed doors. We don't know how they really view Mark Robinson versus Tyler Matakevich. They could see them as nowhere close. Where we're looking at it is like, oh, I don't know which one of those I would cut. So maybe we'll keep them both. Maybe one's way ahead of the other one. Or we just don't know. Right. This is a lot of fun, and it's really exciting. And I could guarantee that you and I are going to have quite a few wrong on these just because there's always something that we're like, wow, I can't believe they did this over this. I mean, even last year, keeping the punter for an extra day.
I'm wrong so many times with these predictions. It's hysterical. But for me, I think it's interesting how when we first did this, when was the first 53-man roster prediction? Was it before training camp? Was that?
It was right after the draft. I think it was before or during OTAs.
Yeah. So when you have those, like early on, it's so many players that you don't really know much about. And then every single time we've done it throughout the preseason, you can really narrow your focus because you automatically see players that are like, yep, that guy's not making the team. And that guy's not making the team. Yeah. And so you're like a Jack Coletto is a perfect example. Yeah, he was getting some rave reviews in training camp, but in the preseason, he just wasn't used that often. He didn't show the versatility necessary. And so we would both be shocked if he actually makes the roster. So it's been a lot of fun for sure. And we'll see how well we do.
And see, there's also one other factor that usually comes in. The Steelers haven't made a significant addition since since OTAs, have they? I mean, there was Quan Alexander, wrong one. Wrong linebacker. That was inside linebacker. They didn't have him. Who was it? Who retired? Marcus Golden. That's the name. That's the name I'm looking for. Marcus Golden. They added him, but a week later he was retired. So there wasn't really anything. Oh, well, they added this and really threw a wrench into what you were thinking. They haven't done it yet, but they've they've done it almost every year. So that's why I think it's coming. We just haven't seen it yet.
All right. Dave, as always, I appreciate your time, man. We'll see how we do. And make sure everyone checks out steelcurtainnetwork.com. We'll have everything for you as roster cutdowns loom. But Dave, thanks again. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.